Hi, this is Terry from Bonsai Tree again, and today we are going to be working, or I'm going to be working on an acacia. This is a customer's acacia tree, but I'm going to be working on it today, applying wire and styling it. Acacias, as you know, are deciduous trees, so they would typically lose their leaves during winter. These leaves would drop off. I suspect that the reason why this tree has not done so is because it was in quite a protected spot. And you'll sometimes find that acacias, if they're kept indoors or grown indoors or in sheltered positions, that they sometimes will not lose their leaves. And I think this is due to a lack in temperature differential or fluctuations between day and night, which I think is necessary as a trigger for them to drop their leaves. So the leaves are starting to brown a little bit at the tips, but other than that, they don't look like they're going to be dropping off anytime soon. If the tree is still holding onto its leaves, it's not a problem for you just to go and defoliate the tree, remove all the leaves, and then you can proceed with the work that you want to do. And also, I must be honest, I'm not a huge acacia fan. With the needles, or not the needles, the thorns. So I will also be just taking the sharp tips off the thorns. I find you lose less blood that way. And yeah, so the first step will be to defoliate, which I will start doing. To defoliate the acacias, you're just going to need a pair of sharp trimming scissors or some other scissors that is suitable. And you're not going to cut. When we talk about defoliation, we're not cutting off these little shoots here, or these little side, I don't know what you call it, and leaving this section. What we want to do is actually remove the entire leaf, the entire compound leaf. And then, as I mentioned as well, when you find a thorn, just cut off the tips of the thorns. The branches, it'll make wiring so much easier. Because you won't have the branches getting caught on your clothes all the time. So it's just a good idea to, as you're working through the tree and doing the defoliation, also just to keep your eyes out open for thorns, which you can then just cut and remove. After defoliating the tree, you can now see the structure that is revealed with the leaves missing. We'll just give it a couple of turns around for you so that you can see the full tree. And now we need to look at the tree and see if we can identify some of the characteristics that are pleasing about the tree, and then some of the problems, and then take a look at how we can address those problems, either hide them, disguise them, or eliminate them. Let's look at the container first. In my opinion, it's been over potted. I also don't think the shape is doing the tree very much justice or enhancing anything particular about the tree. But overall, the problem that I have with the container is merely the size. The problem when you overpot a tree is that you have a tremendous amount of growing media that is in contact with the roots, and if that is staying wet, if it's wet, it stays wet too long, and you may start running into problems with root rot issues. Just generally speaking, the presence of too much or excessive moisture or water in the root zone is going to slow down the development of the roots. So I would say that this tree should be repotted into a smaller container. Generally for this sort of style, which is the African styles, I would have used maybe something that is circular or oval, but not something too geometric. It doesn't really, in my opinion, suit the style as much. Something that I do really like about this species, which is the Acacia gelpini, I think it's now called Senegalia, but anyway, is the fact that it very rapidly forms this flaking bark, which is a very nice attractive feature about these trees. They do that from a very young age. But and you can actually see this piece of bark it's exfoliating. It's very easy to knock this off, so be careful when working with the trees. But what I want to show you as well is also this moss. So we've just come out of winter, or very late winter at the moment. And at this time of the year, we need to watch out for moss development onto the trunks of the trees, particularly those that have got a corky or textured, a coarse textured bark. Becomes a problem when moss is allowed to develop up the trunk, because because it stays, the moss retains a tremendous amount of water. It also causes this bark to actually rot, and then it flakes off. And in a case like this, if this moss was allowed to remain on the trunk, it would cause the lower section of the trunk to become essentially devoid of any of this characterful bark. It would look very odd. So it's important that we take steps to kill the moss and remove it before it does that damage. You would normally use undiluted vinegar and just spray it onto the moss to kill it. And then a few days later, you can just remove it by peeling it off from the tree. This moss is quite dry, so I'm just actually going to remove it with some tweezers immediately, and not do the vinegar. But you can, the vinegar kills the moss. You don't want to use too much vinegar, that it actually drenches the soil, because it's obviously extremely acidic, and that's why it kills the moss to begin with. And so it would also do damage to it'll alter the pH value of the soil tremendously, and that your tree may not like that. So I'd suggest that you be careful when spraying the vinegar, just to spray it onto the areas that require it. This is the first time that I work on this customer's tree. Could say that although some work has been done on this tree, it hasn't really, for me, it doesn't really have a clear direction at the moment. So that is one of the things that we need to give, is to give it a style that can be built on or enhanced over the coming seasons. One of the first problems that I see is this branch and this branch. This needs to be resolved. It is a problem because both branches are growing literally on top of one another. Another area of concern that I have is this space here. The trunk line extends up, although it curves quite tremendously at this particular point. But you have this other branch, structural branch, going off to the left. There was a branch over here that has been removed. This branch over here, although it's a young branch, it's probably developed in the last season, is also now developing underneath the main branch line. This, I'm not sure if I can keep this, but we'll have to look at that. But that is an issue again that needs to be addressed. This area here is also a bit of a problem, particularly this. It is forming very much of a U shape at this point, but it's competing with the trunk line if this remains as the trunk line. So this is something that may need to be removed. Another problem is this very heavy branch in this area. Again, it's a combination of factors. It's the angle that it emerges at, and it's also the thickness of the branch, and then also the fact that there's no fork in the branch for quite some distance. This is another problem area here, where you've got branches crisscrossing one another. So that'll have to either be corrected by pruning or by wiring and opening this up so that the branches do not cross in this fashion. When looking at the entire tree, there is a lack of ramification, which one would expect because the tree is still very early on in its development, at least as far as I'm concerned. But you can see this very long branch over here. It doesn't have any side branches, any forking in the branch. So we'll need to deal with that. Fortunately, acacias do bud back very easily, so it's not a problem to correct it. This is currently the front that the customer had chosen. One would assume that that's why it's been planted with the length of the pot. If it was in a round pot, it would obviously be a little bit more difficult to determine where the chosen front was. However, the problem with this as a front is that this trunk line extends dramatically towards the viewer. It's too much. So I don't really like that as a front. One way to solve that would be to elevate the tree with some wooden blocks, so that you lift up so that it's not so leaning so much forward. That helps a bit. That would be one way to counteract that. But that isn't a very interesting. It isn't a very interesting front, or it wouldn't make for a very interesting front in my view. I find, and then obviously this is not really the back. I would say that's certainly not a good view as a front. It certainly could be a back of a tree. Front. I do know that this tree is being positioned very close to a wall, and I presume it hasn't really been turned as often as it might have been. I find this to be a much more pleasing and interesting view, where you can see the trunk moving, giving you some interesting movement. So I've decided to remove this branch first. It is a problem branch. I'm hoping that I can keep the one above it at least, and just wire it into a better position. But certainly that lower branch needs to go. So just removing it, the majority of it, with a root cutter. And now I can go back in and hollow it out a little bit better with a knob cutter. So let's just take it off in sections. Be careful of the thorns. You could also use a saw just to give it a slightly concave. Before I go any further with the styling of this tree, I would encourage you to purchase a really good book. The book is written by Charles Saronio, who's now deceased, but he was quite a well-known South African bonsai artist. And he wrote this book, Bonsai Styles of the World, and in it he features probably most of, if not all of, the bonsai styles that you would typically find all around the world. And he has a very good description of the various sort of forms, natural forms that acacias grow in, including the Pierneef and the flat top acacias. And it's a great way to, if you're not sure of how to start the tree off, or in which direction to go and how to create the typical framework and structure of it, this book is a great reference. I'm going to carry on with the wiring, and also just carry on removing some branches that I don't want for my design. And if there's something really important that I want to share with you, then I'll stop. Sometimes you'll find that a branch, you have a bifurcation occurring, but it's one on top of the other. So ideally they should be laying in a horizontal fashion. If you then have the foresight, you can wire in the direction that you can then twist the branch in. But then when you apply the wire, you should leave it slightly looser so that as you twist it, it tightens. You don't want to wire too tight, and then when you twist it, it tightens even further and then starts to bite in very quickly. I must actually be honest, I'm a little bit surprised. It turned out a little bit better than I expected it would, so I'm very pleased. It still has a long way to go, but I think the basic structure is now set for the tree. You might recall this branch was a very, very heavy branch, very long, no taper in it, no ramification in it. And what I did is I just cut it off a lot shorter. I've sealed it, and the idea with that is that I would still like to use the base of this branch, but I need something a lot closer to the main trunk. So I need something a lot shorter and closer to the trunk before I start getting branch divisions. And so I've cut this a lot shorter, fairly confident that I'll get some buds forming, and I can then use that in the future to fill this space up with more branches. Just a word about the general approach to styling acacias. Now, I must admit I do not consider myself to be a highly experienced individual when it comes to styling this species, but I've worked on a number of them, and I think I understand the reason that they look the way they do. There's actually a blog on my website which is all about acacias and why they have a canopy the way that they do have them. You'll generally find that the Pierneef or flat top acacia, as Charles Saronio in the book that I referred to earlier calls them, they have very much of an umbrella-like look about them. And the reason that the branches grow like that is, one, is to protect the root system, the moisture, to shade the roots. So maybe it has something to do with heat, but I think mostly due to the conservation or conserving moisture, which would, if it was under the hot African sun, it would evaporate that much faster. So you generally find that branches would emerge at angles which cause the canopy to really stretch and reach. My interpretation of that on this tree, you can see the angles are very gentle, and very broad. They have a slight upward angle to them, and then obviously you can use branches that are emerging from your primary branches to build the volume as well to the canopy. One of the things that I like about the result is, in fact, this curve in the trunk. I was able to increase the curve as the trunk emerges from the soil to a slightly more interesting angle by using the wedges, the wooden wedges. So in future, the tree, when it is repotted, it will be potted at this particular angle. So you've got a slight, left to right movement, and then quite a dramatic bend over here at this portion of the trunk, and then of course your canopy spreading out from there. And it's also important that when you view the tree, you should have branches going in all directions. So if viewed from the top, that you actually get branches moving in the full 360-degree radius. That really gives a lot of volume to the tree because you have branches going to the back, and then of course you have to have branches coming to the front. But it is quite nice to have at least portion of the front view of the tree fairly open, which sort of invites the viewer's eye to travel up the trunk and into the canopy. At the moment, Of course, there's no leaves on the tree, so you can really see right through the tree. When this is filled with leaves, some of the areas will be a little bit more obscured. And then finally, some comments. This tree will now, I've sealed all the cuts, sealed the wedges, the wedge cuts that I made. This tree will now go back to its owner, and at the moment the tree doesn't need a lot of water because it doesn't have leaves, but as it leaves out, it hasn't started to bud, but I can definitely see from the cuts that I made that there is definitely sap flow. So I think it's a matter of maybe a week or two before the buds will start popping on this tree. Acacias are a very popular species to work with. It's a highly recommended species for beginners also, because as I mentioned earlier on, it does bark up very rapidly from a young age. And they're great fun to work with, and of course we have lots of local reference material. If you're able to get out into the bush, you can see many acacias growing out in the wild and take some inspiration for that. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed or approve of what I have done with this tree. Hope the owner likes it, and hopefully I can feature it again in the future. But thanks very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and then next time I update with a new video, you'll be notified. So thanks very much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.